the incentive to innovate in video games. U24 copyright is need to rebalance the incentive to create and develop. It enables prevalence of copyright of copying, incentive to create and release games of harm left interest in developers. Inventors on Balance Network, Gamer new releases to recent adjusted to approve the copyright HUD necessary development history. That's key to ABMs. Luke Raju at L14 understand groups become more paramount for predicting, disrupting hacks. ABMs are powerful studies. These groups that will search never find extended communication data. There is a lack of behavioral data. Games provide a source of data. These environments provide rich social environment. Players engage in activities that serve real world groups collaborating, competing, scarce resource and trading strategies reflect and presently conflict. Virtual worlds have the potential for serving as a proxy allocated behavior that would be used further agent-based modeling studies. They provide the best data. Luke Raju at L14 agent-based modeling have complex internal dynamics as a part of the validation problem underlying techniques of the real world. Then this question on how to validate rather reflect data. Good data should contain individual characteristics, but temporarily extended data contained from a large and diverse set of individuals needed to accurately anticipate behavior. Game data can be extremely useful. Your accurate property events in relationship to inform about ABMs that motivate new IPMs can sort of exhibit complex dynamics reflect the real world, make them a great source. But game innovation is key. They're successful because their ability to attract players and create modern and applicable environments. Luke Raju at L14 appealing for complex economies, social structures, games contain guilds or corporations. These have conflict interaction with large amount of people with diverse backgrounds. They are highly experimental, reflect rich social dynamics that occur even occur a little faster, real forms and messaging to study correlation between communication and behavior. There's a literature study showing in-game behavior and certain patterns reflect real world patterns. Solely empirically based ABM parameterization fails. Relevant application is relying on data that is not available. Younoclus et al. 24. Parameterization work for prediction of hypothesis engagement when there is no useful empirical data calibration apart from relevance in ABMs use quality and contextually specific present significant challenges. Games offer a for complex interaction scenarios that other data can never provide. Younoclus et al. 24. Games is a model and form understanding of real world system generate useful data complex set of interaction, natural connection, integrated game with ABM's common pool, research funds to inform design parameterization, ABMs to assist in validation. Now is the tipping point. Advances in computational innovation make games more prone to clones. Distribution is unequally favoring large publishers. Post 24. Cloning automates the economic viability, copy, gameplay, elevator, removal, creativity, less enjoyable games, protecting the financial viability. One may argue there is no need on the grounds. Games experience growth industry has not been distributed equally. Large companies have resource recognition, quality developers, now sophistication as programs will become more accessible, cheaper, and easier to than ever to clone existing title, creating increased risk. Cloning is how you're planning growth, coverage, connection, easier to stop growing market that discourages development, innovative new games. Developers forced to go out of business. Indie developers are strike teams. They have more effective information flow and create more innovation products. Freeman et al. 20. Indie developers prefer teams consisting of small numbers, individual, less resource, manpower, less failure. Indie team is a strike team. Ad hoc team for to solve a complex task is interdisciplinary structure, fluid info flow, quickly deal with an issue. Everyone close collaborating and make teams grow. It's multi you consider the game more heavily within the project. Motivate force developers to be intimate their own products in game. In more innovation, AAA cannot be creative. More people add prejudices and discriminate. Eventually, blame acclamation of opinions associated doesn't trick anyone. Indie teams offer diversity is likely to get lost in self-driven. More willing to experiment large hitter persistence for positive innovation. Else, a laundry list of crisis erupt. Extinction. Other sources of prediction spectacularly fail. All 425. Social society shaped by decision making continues to form. Shape future multifaceted collectives, coordination, climate change, inequality, geopolitical conflict approaches have fear for decentralized decision-making, utopia, both simulation, alternatives, and nature of bottom-up collective decision-making. 21st century unprecedented childhood civilization is not sustainable. Ecological realms, geopolitical crises, and wars are escalating. Bottom-up utopian democratization efforts for reimagine governance. Everything works better. Traditional mathematical models on idealized and axiomatic assumptions converge to specific equilibria. Limited scope analysis, assumption about behavior of agents, purposely restrictive, multi-agent model for synthesis and testing hypothesis with an artificial cell well suited for theorizing why efforts succeed or fail. ABM shed light on existing corruption mechanics, provide the basis for removal, impelling nukes development. Element 21. Corruption hinders development, political stability, effective anti-corruption necessity for development. Mechanisms has to be properly understood. Complexity paradigm as a means to explore the corruption model society can understood by complex aspects in the ABM to service where complex aspects of corruption shed light on mechanisms. Implication development crises are existential. Want to view countries like the new to influence larger country econ development, global development, and poverty benefits, future case diversity, institution vulnerability, catastrophic harm, conflict, and pandemics, econ debt, low-income countries, people experience poverty, illness, hunger, violence, speeding, development, benefit, challenging global politics, environment, impact, diversity, inclusion, multinational corporation, government, orgs, governance, humanity, navigate existential risks. 689 million of the 8 billion people with extreme poverty, pandemics, political instability, risk of biological capacity, malnutrition, we consider poverty, negative face, and international security, equitable governance, injury, terrorism, crime. Further innovation is necessary. Existing models don't incorporate critical factors. Element 21. Further research necessary for properly investigating and determining the mechanism of corruption. ABM tried fertile ground for using bottom compression enables scrutinizing mechanisms, sociological, philological, and political and economic factors need further inspection with whistleblowers and not been fully addressed. Corruption is existential. Code 25. Corruption is corruption is existential threat, denying safety, education, drive migration, hollows out institution, corrodes public trust towards effective governance, threat to security, equity, and poverty development effort. The polycrisis will destabilize the earth, ensures devastating existential events compound on one another to bypass tipping points. Try or die for cooperative stabilization. Sheffrin et al. 23. International security can increase the complex polycrisis, including social interaction, self-enforcing dynamics such as market crashes, migration, pandemics, and combat the challenge stability leading to escalating interaction changes. One protocol with significant impacts propagate like a domino effect on sending the interaction prerequisites stabilize the enable adaptive policy, the enable cooperative stabilization to improve understanding the points and cascading risk. ABMs are key to solve Sheffrin et al. 23. ABMs in learning to escape the limits models and explore limits to finding adaptive mechanisms according to responsibility to analyze multi-agent interaction, understanding how cooperation evolve in multi-agent setting via transformative policy between conflict cooperation. ABMs implement dynamic systemic risk, macro-scale phenomena, micro-scale interaction among many agent minor events and provoke interchange of cycle environmental energy, economic climate unrest, disruption of political institution, and consulting bioterrorism, human 15 political particularly important for policy such writing response about your demanding well-articulated rapid policy response, inherent uncertainty, model to planning decision-making, extensive variation, and policy options. That is essential of hardware 25. It takes a lower barrier entry being catastrophic capabilities within small research grouping to extinction, notably stems that archive live a class wildfire disruption slow, deliberate release of create unprecedented race form, the bypass immune system, and create unprecedented scale extinction may be plausible, outweighs cryptography, advanced bioscience, accelerated by ability to manipulate living organisms, create catastrophic novel plays, bioweapons, bioterror, constant nukes. Biocheap, and needs to make it more accessible to limited actors on consider synthile. Engineering organisms making the deadly cheap can be carried out anywhere. Insecure lab skills have an ethical oversight of lab accidents. Escape militias are high. Industry diplomacy. Video games bolster specifically non-state cultural diplomacy. Espinal 21 games provide opportunities for cultural understanding and cultural diplomacy. You can furnish the platform to question challenges, restrict inclusion, not to and allow players to access research diplomatic actor, non-sovereign entity, economic, cultural, political interest, cultural diplomacy, share relationship, valuable alternative, facilitate relationship building, empathy, protection, culture building, culture state, amplifies culture, and pursuing the political interest, have a holistic diplomatic endeavor, conversation, have legal power to oblige anyone to behave in a certain way. Therefore, the United States federal government should extend domestic and copyright protection to video game rules. Indie games are key. Espinal 21. Indie games engage in colonial discourse into game narrative, partner with the community, tell the story of classification, digital state, informing culture, knowledge, epistemology, mediation, culture, diplomacy, organization, Nazi actor, perform cultural diplomacy, solves extinction, Pania 14. World's popular work on less less, capable of offering explanation of risk, friends, humankind, to eventually ensure national security, great compensation, the common vision upon security, keep challenges, resolve vulnerabilities and common threats, collective security, have multiple dimensions, also provide challenge in order to become that's key to future diplomacy, not only the other's motivation, wrong foreign policy, decision, turn, content, problems, destabilizing priorities, communication, unconventional security, cultural diplomacy, laboratory, political culture created by means of mutual trust, negotiation, cooperation, identify risk, strengthen trust areas of confidential Africa and the Middle East, penetrating Syria, increase the possible armed climate, generate understanding, replace military force, economic restraint, and political, reducing common causes. That's proven empirically. Parsons 24. This paper utilizes vast statistical tests, robust and challenging assertion of research who argue culture may be insignificant across the multiple culture tension or significant turn to civil war. Due to despite the strength of the institution, tension remain catalyst, inherent limitation of governance, and fully addressing tension fuel larger scale conflict, violence, terrorism, ethnic, and religious tensions. That's probably market tensions.
At the same point.
Yeah.
Let me just make sure. Okay, are you good?
Yes.
What's the agent?
The plain text says USFG.
Okay, the standards of the app, what specifically does it change it to?
What?
I guess the first card says that there's like, I guess, a mismatch in standards.
Yeah, okay, so basically the Tetris decision was problematic twofold. So the first is basically when the court was analyzing video game rules, they were both like video game rules were not copyrightable, but in the process of that, they also they basically muddled the idea expression dichotomy and the audiovisual aspects of the game.
You said the word muddles, like what aspects?
I mean, it's really confusing about like which particularities of the idea expression dichotomy to the point where lower courts can't even enforce it.
Okay,
so I'm not going to talk about the particularities.
So tell me what standard you, I guess, shifted to.
Video game rules have copyright protection post-plan. That reduces uncertainty because the thing that created that uncertainty is the lack of protection for rules.
What part of
like intuitively, rules basically should be protected, but part of the copy. Yeah.
Yeah. What part of the rules lack copyright protection now?
The rules. Rules do not have copyright protection in status quo.
Okay. And rules include. Like.
You want me to like a definition of rules?
Yes.
Here, let me get. There's a part of the Faustina. I'm going to try and get it up. So rules are, as per the Faustina evidence, are explicit limitations and affordances imposed on players of the game by its developers.
Okay. Agent?
I think you already asked me that.
Sorry, I forgot.
Normal means it's probably the courts.
Okay. The agent-based modeling, I guess, what does that encompass?
So basically what an agent-based model is a way of predicting certain things. So we've read a couple of pieces of evidence that indicate video games can provide the data for agent-based models to train on because there's basically complex social and political interactions that are ongoing.
Complex social and political interactions.
Yeah.
Let's look at the Faustina evidence,
That's not the important part. Here are three pieces.
No. The Ellenway evidence says that, quote, corruption hinders development. In what way is agent-based modeling then used to evaluate?
So we read a card, the other Ellenway card, we said further research is needed for properly investigating the determinants and mechanisms of corruption. Agent-based modeling provides a fertile ground for investigating that using a bottom-up approach.
That's just saying that there should be research that is done.
Yes.
How are you able to physically, like, fix it?
Bottom-up approaches. So we obviously don't think that the government is going to necessarily impose certain things, but we do think that at basically lower scale, people can build up and respond
What kind of like bottom-up approach?
I think the Ellenway is like thing like whistleblowers are basically going to like be more able to like call out the government. That's like an example, obviously.
That seems far-fetched. The Altwood card, which is talking about existing corruption, but I guess that's fine. Diplomacy. Explain the internal link to non-state diplomacy spilling up to government
action. The Espinola
action.
evidence says that video games basically offer an alternative to traditional diplomacy, so it's like second round diplomacy.
I guess like it talks about cultural interactions. How is like building a connection with someone at a local level from across the world able to spill up to like government action?
I feel like you just like answered your question.
How is it able to spill up?
Spill up to government action? Our point is that it will never spill up to government action because governments a lot of the times don't want to cooperate. increasing understanding between societies.
I'm starting now.
Might be easier to just like run it over the table.
Yeah.
In the one with the games.
I know. Okay, it's actually, sorry, accident. It's 8, and then, sorry, I forgot the information. It's like ABMs, and then the second one. The focus.
8.2.
GBN?
I'm good. General.
No? First off, is he subset the word into be should be throughout that's WPA violation of the plan applies to subset limited grant anything else allows infinite specific copyright traffic or funds that limits every type of generic itself is T protection and so forth with exclusive economic right 14. Protection and allowing using enforcing the rights of configuration to prevent others from using it. That means as with certain penalties or damages through damages or an injunction benefit. Taking enforcement of basic damages or an injunction violation, the after experience actually copyright rights for non-existent allows process does not serve the protection of an existing copyright Judicial for limited grant that determines that anything in the universe that's not eligible now can be an act making meaningful and equitable possible. When it comes to OIRA calculating the Office of Information Regulatory Affairs shall perform a binding catastrophic restraint of extending domestic and copyright protection to video game rules and issue a model letter to the United States federal government to implement the best outcome under cost benefit analysis. Regulatory review by the OIRA optimizes solvency and avoids judicial backlash on Superior 24. OIRA review extensive areas orientation to anticipate issues and just helps under rules with the resident agencies and the OIRA review. The determines criteria of review basis and they want to show to ship or sold OIRA concludes and the related basis published review has to difference with the packets and the review within the agency regulation is challenging landscape losses benefited. And the approval of course in terms of related development helps ensure that agency regulation is essential or the management so that in the same time the consideration of the efficient the agency to not act for purpose of the BCCA. The enterprise useful structure that we know it is also for much problem is down as server and from the flying regulation start extremely the very coordinated effectiveness company of our train and yet it's a big decision on the side economics and mainstream oriented reviews will sort of make it existential risk level more 22 doesn't use for the capacity to reveal some of the risk and maybe management for challenge to anybody in enterprise is based even against all many how evaluation less traditional areas of this likelihood that are active to do with the risk of climate area should be there some of the media by engineering suspect with over 15 steps just by using CPA analysis review and then never needed that area and then about to give us a little adjust and this risk review by oregano and same options and just recent identify caps next off because the cap case strengthening argument just to generate economic relations and distribution exclusively anti-capital driven right 14 I do recommend links of the research has been interviewed with the IBM with the proposed internet technical law beginning close to the atmosphere of innovation for anyone who works for efficient and developer state to learn history and response to capitalist prevention intellectual reviews and to almost all society can become more essential to learning culture and endless accumulations of sustainable sponsor 23 close to secure lovable features require more means and liberalized transitions of necessary mitigation require everything growth is given permission protection news over what we necessary scientific attitude that green growth is a kingdom like the right kind of collapse with us body cycle leadership that green growth no one exists with capitalist within these effort by our love rights the energy demand our accumulations and higher percent expected governments and the grants and collective rules resist the middle of the alternative is anti-capitalist organizing by half 17 there's general discomfort within the capitalist system of Washington and rule of trying to sustain coordinate revolutionary mass movements centered on working people to self-production revolution upheaval with the growth mobilizing facing factor composites of the entire neighborhood to launch under control of the geographical business farms schools set up the pressures and political organizations that will see apparatus intact these work are successful but we must take the over electrical voices to be these work of in larger areas compared with the region attack countries transition and movements control by workers next office the politics of the United States federal judiciary should extend the domestic and copyright protection of video game rules to the United States Congress should pass the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017 the United States Congress should not pass the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017 tax cuts are the first order of business Williams 425 taxes will be the first order of business when laws will do the industry and the other policies like that uncertainty set down and there's an agreement that calls out responding to the workers that retire right after income have it and it's less than liberal it's only after business for it is that it's always means only a simple majority of required and IP reform grades PC and question the gender work and only 9 are the likelihood of statute of classifiers by correcting incentives to diverse industries with diverse incentives to real hospital legislation and and also a political capital is prepared to draft and reach the success on ideal legislation most of the power for that. Rather, reforms hard for advice and the real level relief to satisfying results issue. Not populism in a is to be a trigger motives and failure versus manufacturing competitiveness is fifth. 25. Other promoters of manufacturing power and rivers and so even possible manufacturing spin and lower cost of new facilities made of manufacturing drug or strong. Blood manufacturing is ways to be the economic companies where China and does not have manufacturing things. Higher taxes are canceling facilities and are populist or independent countries government challenging economic leadership. That causes global war. 22. Asserting China is one of the more aggressive cultural communication with lots of power for goods new and the rest of the pieces of the nuclear arms and other research accomplishment has a economic and technological advantages capable of the attack and military advantage will review capabilities by your other years will determine whether we can successfully convert air first alchemy and emphasizing the investment in drivers and competitiveness at home. Next up is the enforcement agricultural statutory circular. 21. Agricultural laws and the international country legislative federal reacts after agricultural laws companies subject judicial and other enforcement agency violation of it is not legislative action limits around the expanded topic of court decisions over status quo provision or limited to the for one enforcement agency securing for topic sets and explaining the research road. Next off, this is a plan with the United States federal government share rule at extending domestic within copyright to behavior rules violates the 10th Amendment restrictions the commandeering, conditional spending, and coercion to all authority and power override substantial incentives including financial incentives and incentives and remove all the federal states and territories to create comics and domestic copyright protection to be your group and their rules. Next off is the compact capital yes the living constitution convention call for by at least 34 of the states and not by at least 38 states should extend domestic and copyright protection to begin rules, laws, and fields of politics. LD 18. Compound article of the federal government the states could amend it would be limited to specific issues. Now go to the first advantage. One, you should reject one localist impacts we gave you answers if they isolate one of them, but the second, there's no impact to development. Bizarre. 14. The process is non-industrial security by the research expensive. One of the big cities that are numbered to the factors that are in the space we all the costs of stability and changes for navigating weakness and risk. Each of them is not more oriented than something with power performance and control of those in the outside. And then a little bit of the of pieces of also because of the but I should make a mistake because of security interests of the companies are about their whole government states and the other international organizations like WIPO or whatever so like WIPO solve and corruption there's it's done by COVID and there's no break inevitable and no impact. Let me say 23. The following extremism and so because of controversial institutions media we trust the confidence we can able to discuss with polarization of religious freedom and person most compromise provide so because the nationalist military returns to the disparity social things such as the document the science and journalism and the academia and the advocacy of the libertarian because organizations that for family people and disability and manipulate legislation on already listed more than cities of the environment for the election for the and believe that democracy can help. They say bio and their bio and threat and 20. Technical challenges in the world is more like Facebook and insurmountable and insurmountable and insurmountable and nearly as old as word itself the amateur cities with the very possible and what is by Oregon and when is even known as having any of the number of the surfaces is always a serious development for challenges and so on to take particularly not as well as the attacking to be isolated parts of the experience relies on challenges and military relies on large number of the industry infections force of the primary size and effectively and as a number 60 days and considerable results of the BF that's scoring better than and if the changes by all grades could be weaponized or have done some best something about contagious countries overrunning some of the real best upgrades and movements of the high school habitat and industries that go animated by now let's chances of capability engineering or virtual zero then diverse industry biological future if the living code becomes any type of biological disease impact in cultural diplomacy there's no impact to it young adult 13. Two is a look about immigration to leverage decades without voices and images and research. Global progress in the is a critical thing for the institutional and shared policies to provide institutional policies and people and discoveries. Interesting to people architecture and how the order that all things with the judicial fluctuation power policies with more extensive and intensive requirements for institutions to gather the resources and political will while increasing transaction costs and Trump ruins any reason to see he ruins all type of cultural ties. Go back to the states counterplan. Reliance on state enforcement solves best in a voice politics club. 13. Congress can state optimism for the name of Congress by levels to experiment to the states. We can maximum trade and the same how sufficient for ourselves to be in this or more extra Congress and settlers to experiences that administration making the expansion of the compatible world around the real compatible programs states to use federal accountability. The counter first one. The counterplan builds state power and expertise, expands federal utilization of states and other areas. 13. Improve state government federal intervention states with proactive federals and outside help people in the serving policy for relations with in each new federal government allows and state implementation states. Further expanding the power expansion the utilization of the in other words Congress will also administration states develop administrative regimes in which states preserve the quality of future federal legislation that caps existential risk. 21. Real life technically the world of the disaster for climate for world control the life and controlling disaster roads and news and prediction service risk tech cure disease so we can no nutrition and sort of research with the negative factors by building the BS and policies that guys and visual are about the pressure from state government that are more responsible for helping pressure from the not on the autonomous work and services that are to be activity for world and controls AI their achievement and climate change health of the government institutions that is strengthening Mark the credit strengthening on the state's counter plan that counts as the White House.
Okay.
I'm good.
Do it for context.
Yeah.
What's the status of the op?
Status quo is always a logical option.
Interconditional against Runoffs.
Yeah, conditional against units.
Okay. Are there any theoretical reasons to reject the team decides for topicality? Okay. So the devolution counterplan. Let's start there. So you ban the plan at the federal level, right?
Mhm.
And then you devolve authority to the states to do the plan, right?
Yeah.
Providing incentives. So obviously Tetris was a Supreme Court decision, and it was bad because both of the rules didn't get copyright, but also because of the confusing interpretation of the idea expression dichotomy. What would the counterplan do to remedy that?
Yeah, a few things. You have not isolated a reason why the federal government clarifying that standard is key. We think
So,
that states would
sorry,
fall
let's
as well or
sorry,
not.
let's stop there.
Yeah.
So are state courts reinterpreting this? Like, what does it look
Well,
like?
we think that it would look just like the plan, except that states would devolve, like, the states would have the authority and provide substantial incentives to remove all federal
Wait.
piracy.
Wait.
Are you
Yeah,
asking
finish
what it
you
does
were
for the app?
saying? No, finish what you were just saying.
Well, I'm explaining the part that was.
Yeah, you were saying something about federal. The states are doing something federal.
Well,
No, it's that they, including.
I guess first, it's removal of the basis for which the decision was made on in the first place, i.e. copyright for video game decisions violates the 10th Amendment.
Yeah.
So like that copyright question no longer goes to the Supreme
Okay.
Court.
Are you
It
gonna make a
comes to the
spill?
state.
As the one I see, is there a spill-up argument that the
Well, I
federal
guess-
government would change that?
One, sure, if you make a deficit to it, but two, we don't need to win it because it's no longer in the jurisdiction of federal courts.
Okay, that makes
Also,
sense.
I
So
can
would
answer that
federal?
before
Sorry,
question.
no, sorry. So would federal courts enforce the plan as such?
No.
No.
Oh, okay.
Because
That,
they
no,
don't
no,
need to.
yeah,
The
that,
first
that makes
part
sense.
is
That
really
makes
good
sense.
in
So
that
the net
states
benefit
often have-
argument, obviously the states, the government's given them.
Yeah,
Like-
also, we think that it also probably solves better than the
No,
plan.
that's
The first
okay.
luck card.
Let's
says-
move on. The net benefit. How does the counterplan solve the impact?
Yeah, the glove card is really good in that since state power and expertise specifically is key for federal utilization of states in other
Which part of
areas.
the card do you think indicates that
Yeah,
state
it says, quote, states prevent further encroachment, and then it goes on to give multiple
Yes, and
examples.
then right after that it says, quote, flexible, informal, or voluntary arrangements facilitate international cooperation in situations where binding and formal agreements would be
No,
cumbersome
you're
or
not
slow
reading the
moving.
part, the line after that says federalism proponents wish to put a fence around Medicare. I don't know what part of the plan.
Medicare.
Yeah,
Also-
that's the card that you're reading.
No, I know it. Then how does that suddenly spill up to revitalize things like nuclear?
Yeah, that was the line I just read. It says
Okay,
that
so
states
can you like
prevent
explain to
encroachment.
me kind of what the states do to resolve nuclear development?
Yeah, it says that implementation in different state administrations are really good. It talks
What
about
do you mean
things like healthcare.
implementation?
It
What
talks
are the
about
states doing?
they are making
A
the
couple
government
things.
ability easier. Yeah.
Yeah, also state administrative regimes. We've outlined in
So
the Gluck.
states administer what to solve nuclear
We've
weapons?
outlined in the Gluck evidence that I guess convoluted governmental programs that are currently
Okay, this
done
is
through
not good.
Europe.
The CAPK, what's the link?
You're not letting us answer, but sure. What's what?
What's the link?
The link is IP. We think that anything that is involving property is intrinsically colonial
Okay,
capitalist.
the politics DA,
Yeah.
the plan is the courts.
The point is the
question.
courts, and when in cross-ex, you said.
And when I say cross-ex, I said USFG and then I said normal means.
Oh, in the one AC you don't have a court shield card, so
Yeah.
Okay, so you'll make courts links argument.
Yeah, second,
Okay,
the
so
counterplan
very
means that it
confused.
shields.
Whose political capital gets drained as a result of the courts making a rule?
A few things. One, the counterplan at the top means that
Okay.
even if you are court second, it's probably not.
Are we gonna?
No,
What'd you say?
well, I'm setting it up.
Coffee.
Is everyone good for a order? You said 1 minute.
Huh? No, I said
You're
I'm
good, okay.
I'm putting it up.
The order will be, advantage 1, advantage 2. T pre-existing, T subsets, T no court, the CAPK, the politics DA, the CONCON DA, and then the states one.
And then the OIRA kind of
Oh,
thing.
okay.
Can you say the off case after T again, please?
Yeah.
CAPK, politics DA, CONCON counterplan, the states counterplan, OAR, sorry.
It's OIRA. then
OIRA,
Devolution
then.
counterplan.
Wait, can you say that part again?
OIRA then Devolution.
Okay.
Okay, is anyone not good?
We're good.
Okay. Laundry list is Co-op ABM solves every major threat. The use of data from gates to treat and effectively predict the model oncoming threats, avoids building to every DA and solves every net benefit for every counterplan. These predictions to enable humanity to respond to a laundry list of crises like geopolitical conflicts and governance failures. We are giving you specific crisis, no development impact. We did not read the development impact. Corruption, thumped, no impact. The corruption that extension ensures institutional failure magnifies other risks independently caused development. Crisis through corruption, which causes the extension by escalating violent conflicts via social political instability. They've also dropped the polycrisis, ensures systematic and ecosystematic crises compound with each other, which quickly bypass ecological tipping points and humanity. The bioweapons, the bioterrorism is quite feasible and is an existential threat by re-engineering existing organisms to kill everyone. The COVID thumps is wrong. It wasn't a bioweapon. Proves the brink for future increases in disease and corruption thumped. Corruption thumped. The brink is now in use. Diplomacy. The cultural diplomacy encourages cooperative administration and check back against the lineage of crisis and global hotspots. It's not, the card they read was not about non-state cultural diplomacy, which means it doesn't apply. Trump ruins ties. We solved it through bottom-up approaches through ABMs because we can identify also the need a card saying that Trump would ruin corruption. They can't just assert this T. One, we meet the plan bills on copyright rights, which are definitionally pre-existing. Two, we meet not that. Three, counter shaking IPR protection broadens scope protection mandate subject every court of video or statute whether or statute shaking we can indicate these required IPR response scope or shaking protection. 4A Afghan the court of literature about eligibility requirements to exclude generic apps like paracheck body diagnostics only allowing enforcement apps as far too exchanging. B 5 predictability mandate has intent to define making it easier to acquire make it easier to acquire copyright is certainly shaking. C 6 functional limits cascade econ text and speech generics all constrain the app to topic has fantastic net ground. 7 reasonability keep avoid race to the bottom substance crowd out. 8 no limits inclusion of ground loss protection still to be about what a patent is. They can read the same argument and Runoffs are good. Internet access is widespread, allow instant research and fast checking, makes abuse impossible, and they spur research, creativity, topic evolution, forcing disclosure, removes competitiveness, and to do research, education, outweighs internal impact, to debate T subsets. We meet the effects throughout the area of copyright law. 2, we meet throughout means within Merriam-Webster's 3, throughout in random positions within violence. 3, in we meet subset KC9, images of violence, inside does not require completely to decide something else. 4, prefer A, outground their intervals, means sick, massive acid, booster every day, and pick under the sun. B, limits towards topic education by allowing a maximum of 6. F, C, intent to exclude only or interpassage, which means the most precise predictability from the most common source, which is an actual dictionary. E functional limits, case process counterparts, patents bad, politics, EC, upright. Oh, I already said that. And cross-by reasonability. T courts, counter interpretation, counter courts can strengthen IPR manuals from teacher for decision, legislative action, shaking and weakening intellectual property protection. Courts make it easier to acquire intellectual property, violence, scope protection, all strengthen. 2, Afghan and support of IP protection. 3, predictability. Nor evident it's in the context of strengthening of IP and examines the last decade of IP changes, cross apply functional limits, and reasonability. Cap K. Framework plan plan gets unique links to solve with alt key to fairness and clash setting lower standard for link is unfair and encourages clash avoidance. 2, harm to both. 3, empowering indie developers directly challenges the hegemony of mainstream capitalism and games are inevitable. Career 24 social destruction video game mission masculinity dominance folded scenario and alternative game making embracing limitation of creativity challenge humanity hegemony mainstream game developers combating the inequalities and foster collaboration good the platform the benefit entire community grassroots platform provide a small hope vision of distributed ecology platform socialism. 4, no link IP exists in the status quo the app doesn't meaningfully and reinforce it. 5, the plan the app is a prerequisite to transition away from capitalism. 17 industry behavior, complex solutions, sustainable science, social, ecological, economic solution, probable economic competition, method enabled to research, stimulate social dynamics, expedition, public heuristic to improve. 6, the alt fails. 8, empirics, charges, and recession move the movements, or 2, diffuse the forward competes of powder, hegemony. B, collapses, makes transition or mindset shift less likely. 8, 4, 14, 11, the fantasy back on economic crisis, people stop thinking about their transaction, make up, help mobilize and transform the system. It's not just likely capital market more created by the left, feel it's adverse against decades, many perceptions have come and gone, results in a revolution, some results in the left, recession, and reduce the bargaining power, undercut military solidarity, and erecting barriers to collective action, they can reduce risk aversion, recite crisis, straight relation, creating competition, individual, even a crisis, increased recognition, they make it hard to overcome fragmentation. C, mindset, fiat is bad, roots the app and fiating individual people is infinitely regressive, justifies wokeness, capitalized text, education, and class. 7, studies and data prove the market economies, and appreciate solve the environment and emission gaps. From 24, diffusion of by technology, the adoption of green technology, proving renewable energy stability for your trade is good from the environment, reducing the concentration of emissions, creation of environment, correlation strong, clear, positive pattern, development depends on after some reports that decline degradation, old empirical results, medium correlation, emerging economies and abundance of coal, older alternatives not the same, increasingly value economic friendly products, lead environmentally challenged countries that technology happening quickly driven migration free economies. Condo is bad because straight ones are good, punishes bad ones, sees rewards, smart choices because increased research makes them neg. A moving target causes time to distract you, voted for return to oriented, but you could kick if they read perms or theory allows the after straight turn on the politics aid, perm do both, perm do approve the compound, perm any combination of plans, cross apply to all the counterplans, no link, the plan is scorched, shelter from pressures, war 9, political action, the Christian president, or settle the opposition political demands and elect judicial competition to the courts to take the blame for commits and make electrical cost blame deflection. Herschel 13 delegating for recourse may be an effective means of shifting possibly reducing blame deflection intuitive transfer convenience tree of politicians may be able to settle disputes. Studies confirm that courts ensure greater legitimacy representative more likely to delay power that strategic drawbacks to constitutional review overcome obstruction complexity theory means all neg predictions fail. App solving back check how graph 23 evaluating prediction data could be acknowledged. Develop prediction laboratory showing experimental methods by data measure report predictive performance and regression modeling of selective ABM distinctive and social prediction coherent framework that represent prediction challenges predictive failure and literally using ABMs resulting from policy laboratory develop concepts into a predictive model used for crisis or actually end up interested concon counterplan. 1 both proven to the combat. 3 limited concon counterplans are bad. No literature means an unpredictable index / Yale Law Journal 2393. No such thing as a limited con. 4 it eliminates certainty supports legal challenges causes runways links harder and can't solve reasonable. 18 Carlisle Convention that expanded the steps of open the Constitution gerrymandering political decision. There's no rules of convention review Pandora's box mark the credit box the
Uncertain because it's not a court reinterpretation.
uncertain because it's not a court reinterpretation. The OIRA counterpart purging both purging the counterpart 3 OIRA is packed with industry lobbyists. Their CDA is ever irrevocably corrupt and read in favor of corporate interest. Good 20 corporate interests sort of OIRA and that want to influence it as a place to do a short rule making likely to do the interest politically powerful industries prohibitive when every statute features malleable just enough to justify every change for basic against safe and reinforcing efforts that lack transposed by powerful interests like by transparency encouraged behind closer lobbying and hosted publications with receptive audience talk with the economists and sample regs. The justification can be manufactured exposed CBA regular rulemaking objective control of window the impossible to accomplish or orientation about changing organization culture change competition leadership on collision commitment transparency 4 and even if it does get implemented the historic record of regs reputation means it will be perceived as an industry cover-up or lie that doesn't solve the case because it doesn't bolster certainty sufficient to revitalize investment. 5 there's no evidence saying spillover or the OIRA is the only way to solve international regulatory regimes. Solve 6 the count as a legal joke. Section 24 constitutional judgment expert on disqualify constitutional judgment layman and effectually legal question should be rejected. Illegal 2 code of conduct 14 restriction of ex parte communication includes communications from others not participant proceeding. A 7 OIRA review occurs now. 8 perm plan the Office of Information Regulatory Affairs should perform a binding catastrophic risk review. Devolution capital perm do both perm to the capital links to uncertainty. It doesn't have the federal government reinterpret the Tetris decision fails to create judicial guidance. U24 analysis offers a standard for judging radius that offers specific guide for application of rules numerous precedents abstraction filter comparison test builder analysis case law heavily reliant effects and pervasive sufficient effects analysis reports are objective precedents that analyze different subject matters not appropriate for competition not benefit. No presumption irrelevant if states say no to the plan durable fiat solves the app solves the net benefit via ABMs no spillover 1 instance can encourage net benefits is nonsense states can't bolster regulations of nuclear development perm plan devote copyright to states text inserted even if the states will do the plan it still create massive uncertainty because it was a federal ruling if they're right about the novelty of the net benefit that's proof. Back up to which obliterates the innovation incentive cognitive stereotypes ensure lackluster protection for rules. U24 justify games rules subject to protection helps rebalance incentive create developer industry outdated precedents or cognitive stereotypes rules are rules for international activity given by courts and policymakers from accepting rules can be expressions of practical ideas not eligible for review under the idea expression dichotomy. Politics 1 CDA is about PC the plan wouldn't trade off with any political capital all causes to manufacture. Yeah.
Wait, can I wait till I get this?
Yes.
Oh yeah. Oh, is that?
You right. Okay, please send.
I'll let you know.
Reason to reject
Condo.
counterproposal. Also, you said concon had.
That's reason to break the counterplay.
Okay, that's it. Cool. Let's talk about this complexity theory card about Shadow Brown. I'm reading it and it talks about how evaluating specific predictions failed. Your entire first impact is based on predictions.
Yeah.
Why does the app solve?
So the Shadow Brown card just says that current models are insufficient for evaluating predictions only by using complex data that we obtain from video games. Could ABMs actually
Agent-based models and their methodology have a distinctive role to play in social science predictions.
Yeah, this card is about how ABMs specifically can
Yeah, I
split
know.
up
It
the
says the
solve.
word ABMs, but it makes a
I
distinct.
just read the line that literally says
It says,
ABMs.
yeah.
Let's move on. Blame deflection. This card indicates that it allows court to deflect the blame from the public.
Wait, sorry. Let me just, the 1 in C dissad was about political capital.
Yeah.
Obviously the court would not drain anyone political capital. This
Yeah, sure,
dissad
well,
is
court
nonsense
would
as
not
of the 1 in What do you mean what part of the card gets that? Your 1NC card is about like Johnson or Trump or something.
Obviously, it's
the-
about IP reform green capital. Your IP reform.
No, the first uniqueness card you've read in the 1NC is like political capital is key.
Yeah.
Obviously, no piece of evidence indicates the court's
The
political
Bergen
capital
Lenwick
is
card,
key.
but sure, this is my process. Okay, let's talk about the certainty deficit that you read on the counterclaims. This card says that there needs to be a clear standard between inspiration and infringement. Why is this a Fed key warrant, and why is this like an AF key warrant?
On the devolution counterclaim?
Yeah, like this card that you read, the OZER card that you classified.
The OZER card?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the OZER card says a clear and legal and clear framework is
Yeah.
key because of the idea expression dichotomy.
Yeah, but it
Anything
says-
else that's not federal protection
Sure.
that
What line of the card
resolve-
says that? The line that you've highlighted that says clear legal framework is about inspiration
Wait,
versus.
sorry, I don't know if I
infringement.
was reading the right 1NC, but do you have a card that says the states should do the plan, or am I missing something?
Few things. We said that states are better than the federal government, but do you have a card that says federal government?
Yes,
key?
every card in the 1AC that says the Supreme Court.
Give me a card. Give me a line.
Faustino. Do you want me to
Faustino.
open
Yeah,
the
sure.
1AC?
What part says that? Yeah.
Okay, let me.
What part says that the federal government is key for certainty? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm opening the 1AC.
Yeah. I can ask other questions too.
I mean, also intuitively, federal courts are key to enforce the plan.
Intuitively. Okay.
Yes, I mean, that's
Sure.
how video game
Other than
evolved.
federal key warrant, what part of this card indicates that the AF is key to a legal framework that is distinct from any of the
What
counterparts?
card advocates that AF is key?
Yeah, like what part of this card says that the AF's process is uniquely key and a counterclaim would get
Yeah,
you one?
because the AF sets clear legal boundaries and
If the counterclaim
Prove it.
sets a legal boundary between inspiration and infringement, does that mean that it's clear?
if the AF sets, I mean, that's not the only thing it has to do.
Well, that's what your card says.
Well, that's just one of the things that matter.
What's the other thing?
I mean, we've read other cards.
What
It has to resolve the idea expression dichotomy. It has
Resolve
to,
idea expression.
yes, it has
through
to
the
make
plan.
The counterclaim could result in the whole app, but the problem is Tetris was also bad because
sure.
of the problem.
Let's
also
talk
cannot
about-
be politicized.
On the first advantage, let's talk about the internal workings. I guess I'm a bit confused about how it would stop bioterror. Can you kind of explain how the video game industry is key to stop that?
Well, yeah, it's about ABM modeling. We have
Yeah.
already read a multitude of evidence that video games are key to ABMs, which solve that.
901.
Yes, 901. Very nice.
again, please? A little louder.
T courts, the state's counterclaim, and then politics. Oh, sorry, it's on this side. Has everyone got the cards?
Yes.
GBN, are you guys good?
Just give me 1 second.
Oh.
I'm good.
Okay, everyone. T courts, top law supposed to be Congress, not the courts. That's a stop blue evidence violation that acts mandating solely enforcement. Preferred one is limits expand the topic pass. Congress creates a flood of affirmatives that endorse, repeal relevant court decisions, or even have courts force agencies to adopt minute standards. All of those acts are really distinct from the status quo and have no intrinsic solvency advocate for dissenting opinions, which means the scope of neg research is impossible. There are infinite number of small technical circuit splits in the IPR that become topical affirmatives under their interpretation. Reject the counter-interpret. One is it destroys limits of ground. That was all above. Two is the precision is that our evidence is clear, and enforcement is distinct from typical protection. Their evidence is just in the context of a single study indexing and has no broader intent to define. Christopoulou analyzes data from every source and assumes IP in a way that the protection was implied and advantages and ensure app specific prep and new after pad and dodge clash and mood engagement that they say predictability. It's wrong. One is limits outweighed. Impact is half unfairness. Overall offense proves negative fairness outweighs. Two is logic. We reject predictable arguments like NTA and RegNeg because they're unfair and were predictable. That was all done above functional limits. They failed. One is their bad limits are good. Two is often proves that they decimate the only limits. Three is Rex education arguments with no good evidence cause field debate. So they say reasonability and cause judge intervention and all reasonable interest to restore limits by competing interests cause a race to the bottom. There's definitely no functional limits and they decimate core topic generic core topic generics because apps can say that they are fiat. In fact, they did it in June because it stopped to say that it's not perceived by any reasonable metric. It said that it's try or die on a topic with no fundamentally uniqueness. Go to Lopez. You cannot answer the devolution counterclaim without theory, regulatory breakdown, cause extinction, emerging tech, climate, and nuclear exchange, geoengineering, and cyber war all run the Western ecosystem collapse and exponential escalation and unforeseen existential consequences that only proper regulation solve. Cumulative existential risks from a failure to regulate tech outweigh any singular scenario, and states are key, local for knowledge, expertise, political, palpable, and make them unnecessary stopgap for otherwise failings federal government. That's all the wise evidence. Frame all the deficits in the 2AC through specificity to the counterclaim and hold the line on new 1AR extrapolation because the largest thing I have here is signaling, but it's a non-starter. One is perm to both. It fails if mutually exclusive. The plan requires federal jurisdiction. The counterclaim evolves into the only legitimate program. It's applied to simultaneous enactment of federal protection and incentives for the states. It links to politics. Instead of delegating implementation to delegation authority to the states, the program requires that the federal government hamper out hard policy details and intrude on state authority. Three is they cannot solve the internal. Giving states incrementally more power is key to state and administrative capacity. It's simultaneously enacts more and enacts. It means that state agencies are never able to gain expertise. That's all the block evidence and the firm proud to see regulation and experimentation out of 6. Federal election distortion action. The federal standard signals more trading since state rights aren't necessary. That adaptation may introduce states within the state to adopt comparable protection crowd out to amend measures to reduce net benefits and it result in a net reduction and its federal overreach since 1996. One might assume that IP fall under a suite of federal order. However, national government is supposed to be limited and may not regulate areas simply because natural regulation seems good. Federal intervention need to be justified in significant areas and state governments. And IP traditionally considered to be state regulation and overlapping mandates cause federal regulation failure. That's Rob 23. Regulatory failure caused by overlapping regulations and ambiguous overlap cause policy objectives and your regulation and regulatory odors overlap and inflict real costs since they're repetitive but then inspections and Judge Kick is key to flexing logic. You wouldn't vote for something if it was worse than this quote. They say no spillover, it's wrong to counterclaim for state expertise in administrative capacity and being counterclaim solved. That's the sonic evidence and that's all that was above. And 2 is experimentation. It sends a signal to future federal policymakers and empowers states to have incremental more responsibility. That's all the block evidence the counterplan usually does not have a good spillover card, but ours does, and funding state initiatives are key to encourage state regulatory creativity and build state capacity to oversee. States are indispensable to federal government to resource the PC to adjust and address pollution with the 40 years of experience with federalism. States are seeking players with more expertise in EPA, market EPA, and it solves for precedent. One is devolution. The counterplan devolves authority to the states, which means the only precedent exists is the one that is being set by state ruling. Two is ruling exerted statewide legal consensus, and consensus causes future Supreme Court precedent. That's guarded 3. State constitution counteract the national government right to check national judicial power. The state protection divergence from court precedent. Check national power forcefully. Public critique influence official republic opinion on federal ruling necessary function of the state monitor federal court and appearance unison among state courts and disagreement with federal courts proven by map. That's Charter 3. State courts implement a national jurisdictional power with legal consensus. More state courts agreeing on influence of federal reasoning and the consensus on an equal reference point and point federal court. The courts will consult the state courts of common law and examples and mark the card at map. There is no certainty. There is no certainty or signaling. No certainty or signaling. There is no certainty or signaling deficit. One is there's no impact or risk. The states don't implement the act is less impactful than the punishment of not adhering to the counterplan rule. 2 is sufficiently compare the counterplan to the status quo. Not the act. The counterplan is sufficient to solve for the worst components of the status quo. Perm other issues rejected. They do not send out the text. I did. New answers if they do. 2 is sufficiently compare the counterplan to the status quo, which definitely is sufficient. And the intrinsic perm counterplans need to be functionally textually competitive. 1 is end ground. 2 is topic bias cross platform. 3 is structural bias. 2 is the topic debate. Infinite prep. It means that in the last speech all out wow. Wait, C is controversy process counterplans. Incentivize controversial acts to answer process counterplans. And 4 is word games justify scramble prints. It has to be all net ground and fiat out of net benefits. Limited intrinsicness is taken arbitrary proven by people originally going root against process, but now kick against grand counterplans and other perms and on defense. 1 is other perms solvency advocates. In decision making theory checks. 2 is inevitable impact on states and advantage counterplans are germane opportunity cost go to actually and predictability. The resolution calls for debate over actions, arbitrary rules, destroy debate, and make ban the plan competitive. Erickson 3. Each competent agent doing the action the U.S. show that urges an action the entire beta whether something might not or out occur. Go to politics. You cannot only read one card on politics and not contest the link limit and not contest the uniqueness or impact level means 0.0001% risk is enough to vote now manufacturing decline causes strategic transition wars declining production and capabilities and blooms Russia and Chinese aggression which upsets stability. That's all the Flurry evidence. No all causes. I get new answers if they explain the two word but with no warrant. I'll answer the link here. IP reform crushes the agenda. Any attempt at reform runs foul with diverse industries and Congress never touches it. But court action does not shield politics and inevitably gets into the president. They have not contested the PC internal link, so you know it's enough. Harrison 5. Well, the Supreme Court now has been acted in political cover not to rule or post pushing before the court scene. A politicized body highly anticipate that the court action is not blamed on the president of Congress or preposterous or even the court is enslaved from politics. Congress would receive a large portion of the blame, and courts are not enslaved from politics. Controversial and significant court rulings generate a national political controversy. Champion 6. Involvement judiciary not a political consequence of the goal between progressive Democrats, Republicans, regarding court decisions, and the social ramifications guaranteed in the courts would have come the national politics debate and not hear the political controversy over the court's diminish anytime soon. We now have a new era for the American judiciary and an era of models of control, judiciary and criticism. The bench reflect that underlying division of the country's values in the courts and political thicket. Impossible to let them escape. The framing issue is not contented any part of the link. So even if you don't think that 100% depends on Trump's PC, they've not contested it, so, yeah, it's a question of timing, which is the only thing I have.
You good? Where does Christopher define strengthening protection of IPR?
I guess it draws a distinction between protection and enforcement. He says that protection is a question of, like, actual statutes in Congress. Enforcement are those kind of, like, judicial rulings that delegate it.
Okay, the devolution counterplan, which cards have you read that say that there's certainty in courts' rulings or their precedent?
Well, lots of things. The Gardner card, the second Gardner card, all talk about how first the devolution is able to solve for it because it just becomes a question in federal or in state courts. 2, even if there's some like chance of a mismatch, then inevitably those cases will reach the Supreme Court and yeah.
How would those cases reach the Supreme Court?
Checking national judicial power, state rejection of divergence from court precedents, check national power. forceful public critique, influence public
Sorry, can you
opinion,
just
and federal
explain it?
law.
You're just reading lines.
Yeah, because the card says point blank that the rule in favor of the
Yeah, I'm
states when
asking
it violates
how.
their.
How would it reach like the Supreme Court?
Because if the, like, I guess states are uniformly doing something, inevitably that would spill up if there's any chance of like miscommunication or overlap, whatever.
You're just saying it would spill up. Why would it spill up?
One, we've said that we don't need to win spill up because it just becomes a question of state courts.
I'm
If-
asking that.
If there is like somehow some confusion at some point, those would inevitably reach the Supreme Court. Like that's how the
Okay,
appeal
I mean,
process works.
I guess that's fine. The politics DA. This card is from two. Okay, how is court action blamed on?
Actually, the Harrison card is shockingly good about talking about the post Bush v. Gore environment, i.e. Americans have increasingly polarized views of the Supreme Courts, and they see them along ideological lines. We think the same will be true for Trump. Your, I guess, general, like,
I guess
claim
why
that
do you think it
no
would be true
one's-
for Trump?
because it inevitably gets tacked to him.
Why? What
bottom part
connection
of
does
this
Trump have
card-
to the plan?
Says that Congress would receive a large portion of the blame,
Why?
because the court is now seen as political actors, i.e.
Why
like
are
they
they
are
seen as
forwarding.
political actors?
It seemed like they are forwarding Trump's agenda. Because of that, Trump has a loss of ADC.
Why does this
Because
look
IP.
Why does this look like Trump's agenda?
Because that's what the card says. It says in the post
But
Bush v.
have you
Gore,
read any specific evidence about the plan that the plan looks like Trump's agenda?
we've read that IP is viewed as politically contentious. We've read that the actions that are taken by the court that are politically contentious inevitably get tied to like the president in office.
Okay, that's fine. Wait, Ethan, did you want to say something?
No.
Okay. IP owners already look to the states. Stevens 20. This just says that IP owners look to state law. Why do you think it means that they look to the precedent of the court's decisions?
Well, I guess one, because we make it a question of state precedent by devolving it over the 10th Amendment. Two, like states having control over IP isn't some novel thing. Like it's not all investment goes to shit because they're like states don't know what to do. The infrastructure exists, and also the precedent for like companies looking to state courts exists.
Alright, we're gonna start back. Alright, 7:51.
The order is going to be the content plan, the OIRA pattern, the politics decide, argument on the team, or I concede on the pair many theories, or the argument on the team, all politics concede. The uniqueness counterpoints we're not going for them. The complexity theory stuff is definitely wrong because if it's true, then it definitely links back to them. The card just says ABM, so vaguely, but they've not accurately and explain why this means foundation theory. We get new answers if they say something that the card doesn't say. Now go to the cap. I'll do condo at the top, counter with negatives, what we did against new. That's best. One is negative best. Prominent advice on the topic, no decides, zero mechanism, and trump them. Decide we can test the after multiple ways to find the best strat. And the fact that they broke new proves that we can do that. You give us so much leniency. 2, argument, innovation, conduct, case testing, arguments, otherwise change your generics, and ideological flexibility to capitalism. 3 is app construction. Advocacy pulls forces when he sees their necessary sufficient limits of bad so that defense of the plan. 4 is breadth over depth. Allows for a wider range of knowledge on the topic that's key to education. 5, speed and distance, time express you. Inevitable reject the argument. Not the team and dispose of something wants arbitrary definition shifts. 2, net ground. Let's the off stick the negative back counterpoints are often separately outweighs. 3, paradoxical 2 ways to force the general to go for claim from that benefit. App on presumption. 4, you can solve interest. 2 and so on. 2 process companies to force firms that go to the cap K. Capitalism causes extinction. 1 is ecological destruction. Capital accumulation necessitates a hot house or combating climate. 2 1 that's all. The Schmelzer evidence. 2 is pandemics, war, food shortages, biodiversity collapse, Varsha. 21 essential third second expression of human enterprise of 1 million species with extinction. 2 thirds of the ocean compromised good systems with climate resistance, commerce, organization, just water, condition for air, water, and the 6 major extinction, just resources, there's massive food insecurity, people are starving more synthetic. Comments on the throw, process, increased chance of pandemics, bad governance, first right. International collective, more power, inequality, decision, political consensus, and divisions of democracy, pandemic, biodiversity, lots of president, human disease, human animal interaction with the environment, emerging forces, the intensive forming of the gravity, requires evolution, the economic growth. 3 is AI captured. I would for 19 capital things you would also become an obvious AI will be checks of some human competitive, and then become the community finance they were wage labor, so that humans will need to show how to do the little death, so decision will be the little traffic, welcome to the energy for a little bit, 20% the people that universe oriented. As regards to the communist revolution, that outweighs minority. 20 separate and democracy for building, but the air quality is a little will be predictable research there. Turning our attention to basically artificial intelligence, the case impacts the capitalism turns as the polycrisis that relies on capitalism being sustainable and the investor and the profit motive is the prime reason for corruption and cap causes war, which means that terrorists have a unique incentive and then because of that the culture of diplomacy is wrong because relations are structured by profit and no one will be willing to cooperate. Framework 2 is one was framework. The debate is a site of strategy testing. What is the political orientation spot of the plan? We have an alternate that can consult the philosophy as long as it's written evidence for steps for tactical implementation. 1, it's better to aim before you shoot. Learning advocacy skills bad. If the end goal is flawed, turns class and research to its reciprocal, they get admin to overall the other 3 turns clash. In fairness, the category is the core generic attack on topic with tiny yes and no decide ground, which means first and last speech is also in fair is also term of defense and I'll just defense here. 1 after choice solves, especially when they broke new that get to with their impacts. 2 turn cap is the only base with sufficient evidence to be their interpretation because it's a debate every year and they should be prepared. They said the firm is a monster. 1 framework series of firm suffers capitalist law. 2 that they all reject, which is that. 2 the all plans the plan to roll back to the app. 3 then start this explanation. And then the below will indicate the inclusion of the app would make the capitalist organized if possible. 4 is not the also conservative case with a large external impact and the firm bills should be subject to directions and then the extent benefit. This link the link is IP, intellectual property, and the culture that's structured by profit motive. Incorporating with topic on technical rulemaking, privatizing crucial information for those who can't afford it, uses a tool by the bourgeoisie to maintain control of the ability to creatively produce only outside IP law. The communal system solved in the capitalist accumulation of information. That's right, Evans. Link turn is absolutely 0. 1 IP is inherently capital, so if we want to framework, this is very relevant. 2 new link, they open up avenue for culture to become commodified and part of capital because private elites and they control it, and that's inherently bad. The IP link all provides uniqueness for a risk that we solve. The triad the app is not a prerequisite. Sustainability below approved framing issue that way. Link means that cannot matter because it's a triad for the transition. Capitalism is unsustainable. 1 is the environment, which is above. 2 is financial need. 24 capitalism is as capital accumulates rate of profit walls, the rate of profit is turning. Towards the probability the turning that's in your field, the average between 2% happen. The makes the US rate of profit is cost rate comes for the average as in New York and conversation to 18. US laws more than 90s over versus our terms. So some costs in the second. 3 is laws of physics. Perfect 21. And here this one's the exponential flow over the area. Squaring the match they improve the performance of the over and that backside. And just 1 400 years of circuit that shows this exercise and then possibly everything for really to this expresses the straight that is wasting of activities and both production of death wasting. Increase it with the % of reach of the blade temperature over 400 years. Next, mark that for 400 years. Next is the all doctrines of mass movement against capitalism. No theory in which was clarified in the 3AC means that you assume that we are able to fail. The revolution severely outnumbers the elites. Then the last imposition of global green society that's the only chance of survival. It solves all the gap because of what I did with the overview and transition movement is so wrong because the 1 is sheer number. There's social movements to it's empirically denied. Well, 20, I do not think anybody started just like the impact of the war, generations will cause there would be war. In the US suffered 40 recessions, watch 20 wars. Unrelated to the economy, if recessions will cause a war, they over 8 to 9 of the last 5 states. Do not start wars until they will win the right of a country. Economic condition, by leadership after war, by motivation for wars, and society for security, not economic gain, economic conditions are really factored in. Regularly most of even if there was lasting negative effects on the world economy. Not going to include global war. 3 all causes global liberation.
No, on case they reject modules.
Go to case really quick. First advantage, reject all modules. They do not get to
Devolve conflict firm implementation is
devolve copyright from implementation is to go back to the liberation code. Can you link down to someone using privilege of source is impossible? Not the privilege source, someone rules it. That's the LS8 code.
Okay, perhaps it's some. Yeah. Okay, 4 or 5, I'm sending it out. The order is going to be the agent-based models advantage, then the diplomacy advantage, then T courts, then the devolution counterclaim, politics TA. And then capitalism. Does everyone have it on? They've dropped that agent-based models can effectively enable humanity to resolve every existential threat by predicting future oncoming crises that solve the terminal impact to both every net benefit, every disset, and every link on the and everything on the counterplot. They've also dropped the complexity theory argument. The 2NC argument is not sufficient to check back against this because they've dropped evidence in the context of the 1AC that says agent-based models can sort of predict future oncoming threats, but their impacts are all false all lies, and it's impossible to predict them, which means their internal links can't scale up to solve. But ours can also drop the argument about the polycrisis. I'm not going for it as necessarily offense, but it's the reason we solve the terminal impact on the capitalism case because they dropped the internal link evidence that says agent-based models are allowed to predict that corruption is also existential. It makes it so humanity can't respond to other oncoming existential crises, and drop that bioterrorism is also existential because it quickly kills humanity because of the increasingly spread of disease. Advantage to diplomacy, non-state culture diplomacy also solve the terminal impact to everything because it enables increased cooperation over a ton of existential threats. Topicality must be courts at the top. Their interpretation cannot, or also reject laundry list. Obviously nonsense, unwarranted at the top. T must be courts. All of this complaining about limits. Their interpretation cannot solve this. All of this small ass force agencies, no solvency advocates, etc., etc. It's not unique to the courts. Also, all Congress apps can do this, and Congress apps can also obviously overturn all of the things with the court rulings. The counter-interpretation. Our evidence is the core of the topic. Mandela evidence is in the context of strengthening intellectual property rights. It says the courts empirically can't do it. I'll read another card. Also, 21 the court has consistently repeatedly protected intellectual property rights under the Constitution. The court has actually don't need to read that card. Precision, obviously not correct. Our interpretation is much more precise. I'm going to explicitly concede legal predictability outweighs which is the argument they made on the intrinsic firm on the devolution counterplan, which means you should assume it does. Mandela is certainly more legally precise because it cites the last decade of court cases and make conclusions as to what does and does not strengthen intellectual property. But our app is the core of the topic, which means background certainly outweighs because all intellectual property cases were done, or all of intellectual property is determined through Supreme Court jurisprudence, which means our interpretation is key to solving a lot of the stuff they're complaining about because they get more links to stuff. Limits outweigh predictability, incorrect. A predictable limited topic is better than an unpredictable one. Logic, obviously not correct. It's because all of the stuff they are talking about is not actually predictable. This Affiat in June, obviously not correct because that would be delayed. This controllable evidence doesn't have intent to define and is aft. The judiciary can interpret intellectual property. I'm inserting that evidence in yellow. New apps, totally outdated, internet access, widespread litigation, research, and fast shaking, make abuse impossible. New apps are good for research, creativity, and topic evolution. Functional limits solve their offense against these apps. They link to the same offense. They link to USPTO trade-off, CapCam, politics, elections, picks, etc. Also ensures there's no limits here because of the sui generis counterplan, significant, domestic, etc., etc. The devolution counterplan, it cannot solve the app. It's not uncertain, it's totally uncertain. The Tetris decision generated uncertainty because of two reasons. One, because it undermined the expression dichotomy. They created a problematic precedent for the interpretation of video game audiovisual aspect. The counterplan can never spill up to resolve that because it has the state's role in this matter, not the federal government. Second, rule protection. 1NC cross-sex was explicit that this wouldn't be protected in federal courts. That means that when there's copyright inevitably adjudicated in the federal courts, they have to rule against it. There's no spillover at indicating the federal courts would change their understanding and result in the counterplan. Even if we're wrong about a lot of this, the fact that it keeps the original rule and creating all that uncertainty is proof it would still totally collapse innovation in the industry. Net benefit is nonsense. All of this stuff is occurring in the status quo, which means they can't generally spill up, and obviously incorrect. The states would suddenly resolve things like nuclear development. Other countries can also do it. We solve certainty much better than they do, and federal spill up is wrong. The first card just says that the states should spill up, not that they actually do, and the second card says sometimes they exert indirect influence. Does not make it claim that they would. The permutation, they dropped it. It's permuted the plan in the second plane, not intrinsic. We did send out the text solve the net benefit because it develops resources over general copyright, which solves their internal link evidence about copyright generally, and can't link to their do both evidence because that's all about the plan. The politics dissent. Obviously, all of this is nonsense. The 1NC uniqueness evidence about political capital. The app does not change that. The first card is generally descriptive. Sometimes things are drawn in, but obviously the president was not immediately drawn in. The second argument has insulated. It's just generally nonsense. The court is making an independent ruling. They're consistently ruling against Trump's agenda and stuff like that, which proves that they're not inexorably tied to it. But all of our complexity theory stuff is terminal defense and proof that the app certainly solves the net benefit to this. They don't have any evidence contextualizing it to Trump, and we do. The critique framer, the role of the ballot is to signal who did the better rating compared to the theater plan to uniquely to solve it all. Their interpretations are burdened to topics and lowers their but how much they need to defend. The impact is clash turns all of their offense because it's key to increase engagement about the 1AC. The app link turns this, encourages increased indie developers, which are key to challenging the mainstream threat of rate control of capitalism. Capitalism solves warming ego destruction, diffusion, open markets, and growth economies not only increase the amount of clean innovation, but create a incentive to share the tech because it's cheaper and new market opportunities. Development, growth, which is having past heavy entry into low service economies, causing long-term price stability. The app and solves disease, CO22, capitalist economies, you probably having pandemic first, worker time, entrepreneurial access, control of the government, entrepreneurial advance, microbiology, medicine, virology, companies dominate, university research center, more capitalist economy. AI is wrong. Armament 24, you guys had to get back to the non input for your guidance that were predictable. AI outright stupid. Market evidence at stupid. S risks is wrong. Daniel 17, agricultural flow rates reducing S risk. Those involved in the worst S risk, conclusion brand S risk. There are really criteria severity. We are missing the permutation resolves a lot of their sustainability, often financialization, and is contextualized to the status quo, and they've dropped no mindset shift. We did make alternative theory about how mindset shift is unpredictable and the reason is bad, even if the app cannot, which means that there's no transition. So even if it is, it's try or die. Agent-based models solve the transition to capitalism because they're key to predicting.
401.
Sorry. Thank you.
Sorry, I missed the order.
Politics, devolution, and then cap.
Okay.
Is everyone good? GBN, are you guys good?
Yep.
Drop the manufacturing decline comes with complete risk of extinction. There is no terminal defense here, so even if they win some mitigation on the link level, then logically there is no reason to vote in, and no reason to vote out when winning a large risk of solvency on the devolution counterplan means fundamentally must come first. Manufacturing decline causes strategic transition wars and declining production capabilities of emboldened China and Russian aggression with offset strategic stability. That's all the Florida evidence. Complexity theory definitely cannot hedge back at this, and it's true long term. Think about this. Even if they are to do increase the development of these, and they have no coherent explanation in any speech on how those get deployed to actual government decision-making levels, although which means that manufacturing must come first. The complexity stuff is definitely non-falsifiable, and if we're right, then they definitely should have been able to contest at the internal link level and just prove that the PC thing is really the only thing they have here, but framed through the lens of evidence. Even if our cards are not the most stellar things you've ever seen, we have card 2 and they have card 0 with 0 with warrants. Her explanation sums up to PC does not always change, but there is no reason why federal and why judicial independence is perceived specifically in the post-Bush v. Gore era. The court is seen as a politicized body and is highly unlikely that Congress will not be blamed for congressional judicial action, and they've not contested that link at the IP level, which means you assume it's the most contentious political thing ever. It crushes the agenda. Any efforts to reform run afoul of diverse industries with competing interests and will lobby to oppose the plan. And then Congress really gets touched with IP reform, which magnifies the risk of link. That's all the one in C. Burke and evidence. They have not explained how the app is able to access and impacts the whole line and protect the two and R. And any new explanation, complexity theory stuff definitely answered on cap, but the counterplan solves it because it does all of ABM's. The framing issue is that all the predictions are either inevitable in the status quo or they fail. Their card does not say that ABMs are the only way for predictions, just that they have potential, but no one listens to them, and 2, they've not isolated what predictions are for or how they work. So you do not let the 2 error get away with saying that instead of saying all predictions, you do not know why ABMs are key for every prediction ever, and at the end of the 2 and R, you should still be highly skeptical because their cards are either hacks or do not make a structuring claim. Devolution. Framing issue is that all of the deficits made do not contest that we literally devolve authority over states. It means that any uncertainty is definitely checked by mass action, of which by a mass perceived action the counterplan solves by inducing states to carry out the plan rather than having the federal government strengthen IP and leverages money to have the states implement it and waives all legal barrier to doing so. Drop 2 reasons the counterplan solves and the app does not. 1 is administrative capacity. The Fed is too understaffed to enforce the plan, and only state agencies have the manpower on money to police violations. That's a block evidence. 2 is sabotage. States are happy to implement the counterplan since they get enforcement authority and a reward. They're watered down and resist the app. That's the out their card. Those are carried out and carried to the presumption and giant risk that the counterplan solves the majority of an app. So any risk of a net benefit is enough to outweigh. They've contested the internal net benefit, but not that it shields the politics. Means that the firm they went for is fundamentally nonsensical because it still doesn't test the plan logically, and they've dropped the judge predict is a logical extension of condo if we lose it, but the perm here, it was really short, but I know you heard it at the bottom of the 1 AR, which we said, quote, implementation is key, but regardless, they've not explained why it does not link to politics. So even if you don't buy that it does not link to the internal net benefit, then this is a way out. It is a way out. It still does it through an interstate compact, so there is no reason that 1, it resolves the solvency deficits, or 2, that does not link to politics. It still does act. The certainty deficit is a non-starter. 1 is there's no impact to it. Risk that states don't implement the app is less impactful than the punishment. I'm not adhering to the counterplan's rule. 4 is federal. 4.4 was federal endorsement. The counterplan looks like the federal and the states loved it in love and lockstep, which is net more certain that Stevens' card independently says that IP has been done before in the context. So you should have a very high threshold for it. There's no warrant for quote. There's no warrant for quote investors, but the precedent stuff, yes, it can spill out. One is it's irrelevant because devolution, the counterplan, and it devolves authority to the states, which means the precedent only exists as the only precedent exists is the one that is set by state rulings. You cannot enter this counterplan like the state's counterplan proper. Two is resilient statewide legal consensus comes to future Supreme Court cases. That's a Gardner card. Independently draw, but resolving resources is key to the revitalized federalism, which checks massive existential threats they say doing now without a warrant means you know you come first.
Okay, we have 4 of 5.
Yeah.
a different order.
Mhm.
So the order would be advantage 1, the politics game, devolution counterplan, and then the K. Is anyone not good? ABM solve any existential threat through predictive modeling. Computer simulations can assign agents to complex social and environmental interactions to determine the outcome of any situation before it ever happens. Drop the 2AC Chateau Brown 23 card and all the 1AC evidence that says that all of the predictions are wrong because of complexity theory. Only the app can harness new data from mitigames to solve independent existential risks. I'll specifically extend the biotech scenario. Bioengineered pandemic can go cause extinction because humans can engineer the pandemics to overcome the immune systems and predation, which means they spread rapidly and kill everyone else on the globe in the world. Drop the uniqueness and the terminal impact for this means it's try or die. Any percent risk that the counterplan doesn't solve this means that you automatically vote affirmative. Only ABMs can provide predictive modeling to solve the bioengineered pandemics before they even happen by rooting them out from the start. The politics game. There's obviously no link to the policy DA. Court action is shielded from all politics because it is an insulated body. The Trump does not sign off on conceded the 2NR in the 1AR. The courts make decisions that go against Trump all the time. That means it's a terminal thumper to the thesis of their link. The only evidence they're reading is from 2005, which the court cannot be applied to today's political environment where courts make decisions far separated from the president. Even if they win some risk of a link, there's no guarantee that the plan would cost so much PC from Trump that Congress cannot get the bills to be passed. We are reading more specific evidence the plan is sheltered. We are reading more specific and recent evidence that the court is sheltered from political actors. The court is not at all applied to the decisions of the president, which means that Trump is not blamed for it. Also, the blame deflection. Herschel 13 comes from the 2AC says that delegating authority to the courts means shifting responsibility and reducing risks for the president and other political actors, which means that the court is an isolated judicial body. This is a politics state. We are reading a court's app. There's no link. Conceded that complexity theory also solved the DA. The 200 arguments are all paper cuts on an elephant when we are reading a plethora of evidence specific to why ABMs make us able to predict every threat. The neg is not reading any cards in response to this and only asserted that there's no warrants, but the cards will be in the card doc and you can read them yourselves. ABMs are key to provide us data to any risk through complex interactions, which means that we solve the terminal net benefit to the politics DA because the ABMs can provide a solution to it through using predictive modeling. Sorry, states. The counterplan is nonsense against the Supreme Court act. The Trench's decision was both problematic. Audiovisual interpretations of game copyright rules also failed to give them protection. The states all doing the plan would not make any sense or send a coherent signal for two reasons. One, precedent drop. They can win that the states result in the act in full protection, but our point is that if the Supreme Court does not guarantee protection for video game rules, then there will be tons of uncertainty in the industry because the precedent about audiovisually will stand. Two, protection as the states enforce the opposite of a prior Supreme Court ruling. That can't solve the case at all because no one would believe it. This is just intuitive. They don't have any evidence that indicates that the fact at all that states are doing the plan can reverse perceptions of a court ruling. The impact to certainty is massive. We read great evidence saying that it's key to bolster investment in the industry by ensuring that indie developers are able to increase how much money they're putting in. The counterplan does not look like federal enforcement proven by the fact that they banned the plan. It's like we want nothing to do it. Here you go. States do it. Spill up is nonsense. They don't have any evidence about this. The ev is either like the federal government should listen to the courts or that it might, but we have specific evidence that says that status quo is confusing precedent means the courts will err on the side of not protecting. Perm do the plan in the second plank, even if it doesn't shield politics. It solves the internal, unwarranted in the 1NR and the 2NR. It still gives it resources, which solves no spillover. Obviously, one instance of doing the counterplan cannot spill over to broader usage, especially if we've been a certainty deficit and their F is about past instances. The reason all their presumption stuff is zero because the app is coarse, durable, fiat. Also, obviously solves their arguments about why agencies might not be able to enforce, and the 2NC was super blippy on why this would apply to the 1AC. What was the
Capitalism K, they've dropped that the app solves unsustainability.
On Cap K, they dropped that the app solves unsustainability.
All their impacts are
terminally unsustainable.
Especially manufacturing
on a politics day, and we have read specific evidence that ABMs are key to solve on any unsustainability, which means that we solve the terminal. The app is key to solving the manufacturing from the politics day.
States watered down on the counterplan.
States watered down on the counterplan.
Nonsense because the app only requires federal.
Nonsense because the app only requires federal force to implement it.
The 2NC might have read evidence about other policies, but not about the courts.
The 2NC might have read other policies, but not about the courts. 100% risk of athletes driving. Good debate.
Do you want cards?
Thank you.
I've never set up this iPad. Someone should take it down.
Yeah.
I don't want to have to deal with it.
Should we record our conversation?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, if that's something we do, that's fine. But I just want
I think-
someone to be in charge of this.
Yeah, we'll take
Okay,
it.
cool,
Yeah.
great, thanks.
not it. It's not. It's not.
Okay. Just go. Is it? Yeah.
I think Joe's looking for Ethan.
Okay.
Right. Fine.
He said.
Okay. We have everybody? Congrats to both teams for reaching the partial doubles of the Tournament of Champions. The decision is a 2-1 for the negative from LASA.
So I think that I'm not surprised this debate was a split. I think that this is a debate where there is a very small risk of a solvency deficit and a very small risk of a net benefit. And in this debate, I thought that a small risk of the certainty deficit was bigger than what I thought was an even smaller risk of the politics this had. So for me, the biggest issue was just I wasn't quite grasping onto the Link story in a way that really cohered to me and in a way that was tied to an internal link, right? So there's a lot of talk in the 2NR about how, and in the 2NC about how the post-Bush v. Gore courts are super politicized, which I sort of hear you about, but I don't quite understand why that politicization then means that a stakeholder does not have political capital to get the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act extended. And, part of this is because there's a little bit of confusion over exactly who the stakeholder is that matters. Like, is it Trump? Is it Republicans in Congress, right? Whose PC is key to this? Those sorts of questions were a little bit unresolved for me, and they're making this big push that's like, when the court makes an action, no one in Congress or the president loses political capital. And so I thought that there was a very, very small risk that there was a link to the politics TA. I do think that there were potential avenues of explanation for the neg here, like Trump has appointed 3 justices. Minimal means probably means one of Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, Barrett vote for the plan. That gets tied back to him in some way, shape, or form. But none of those sorts of framing arguments I thought were in the speeches, and so I just didn't think there was a big risk of politics. Deficit, I thought it existed, albeit small. So the 2NR's big refrain here is that none of the AF's certainty arguments assume the process of devolution, but I'm not quite sure how that obviates the deficits that completely obviates the deficits that they're going for, because the thing that the counterplan devolves is not authority to hear any copyright case whatsoever, but it's authority to do the plan. So the counterplan devolves authority to extend thin copyright protection to video game rules, and then they do that, but, you know, in instances where there are, you know, somebody has a copyright or is confused over whether or not they can copyright a video game, there's still this federal precedent that they said is really bad and creates a bunch of confusion for people in the industry. And so I think that that confusion still exists somewhat in the world of the counterplan, because I think that stakeholders don't know exactly, are their cases going to be heard in state courts, are their cases going to be heard in federal courts, how do they hear this deficit? I certainly hear you in the 2NR on this deficit doesn't seem to have like a big impact tied to the 1AC, and I think that, you know, AF certainly needs to do a little bit more work in the future when making some of these certainty arguments about, you know, the impact of the certainty deficit, why, you know, investor certainty and confidence matters for the internal links here. There is some of that debating in the 2AR, and I do think that it's enough to make this deficit bigger. I don't think that the counterplan spills up to federal precedent, because the counterplan bans the federal courts from, you know, via the 10th Amendment from ruling on the plan. I do think that also that there are some avenues for the neg here, primarily in the context of sufficiency, right? So what the counterplan has to solve is not that, you know, you make the maximum amount of video games, but it's that there are enough new video games made to do the agent-based models thing, right? And that's probably a little bit smaller, right, than all the video games ever. So, you know, I think a framing for the 2NR that's like, even if there are some, you know, some uncertainty, some less investment, some less dollars being spent in the video game industry, there are still enough in the world of the counterplan to generate the agent-based models, which is sufficient to solve their internal link. And I think that sufficiency frame should be more prominent in future 2NRs about arguments like this. I also think that just like, as an aside for the AF, and I'm sure you'll hear about this a little bit later, going for the certainty deficit against the devolution counterplan abstractly is not a very happy spot for the AF to be against Lopez, right? You want a theory argument, you want to make, you know, a theory argument, a competition argument, you know, this counterplan cheats to the fullest extent of cheating, and so I think that a bigger push there probably makes the AF in a much happier spot than going for substantive arguments.
Yeah, I echo all of what Johnny said about this being a really close debate. I think in the end, the counterplan overcomes most all of the certainty deficit based off of my reading all the evidence, which I'll explain in a second. There's a risk that the link to the politics is that, and the case involves impact arguments are low due to 2NR solvency arguments that are not answered in the 2AR. I think this debate was tricky to decide because both teams are not making the most intuitive arguments, like Johnny just explained in the context of Lopez, but I ultimately think that in terms of debate math, the dissent has to outweigh a risk of the deficit in case. So the counterplan, the perm obviously solves the internal net benefit stuff. That doesn't matter. It doesn't shield politics. But I also think you need to make the argument that obviously devolution would link to politics because it devolves mass authority over an entire subset of copyright law, which would be really, really politically contentious. I initially thought that I would be AF on the certainty deficits, but after reading the card docs, I almost agree exactly with the 2NR's characterization of the deficit, which is that it does not assume that the counterplan text literally devolves authority over the area to the states and removes every federal barrier in the area of the AF. So this is the wrong approach to devolution, which Johnny just said. I don't think I really need to harp on that anymore. But basically it means I'm left to evaluate whether a counterplan that devolves authority and removes all federal barriers to an interstate compact to do the plan is more or less certain than a plan that has the courts clarify this precedent. The AF has good certainty key evidence, but they don't have good federal actors or key to certainty evidence, so you're missing the internal link to the deficit. The Faustina evidence says definitively categorizing the cloning of games as copyright infringement, thin copyright protection for rules would deter cloning in a way the status code does not, which is agent agnostic. The second Faustina card says the confusion is over rules which the counterplan clarifies by the states. The Osterk evidence has no mention of the federal government. U is the same thing. So the genericness of all of these certainty cards ends up hurting you more than it helps you because it's not, you know, there's just like not a specific internal link that the counterplan doesn't access. The counterplan cards that you read in the 2AC for the deficit, the U card says that previous precedents impeded clarity because courts often cite outdated precedents that are not appropriate for comparison or beneficial. To me, the text of the counterplan reads as if it would do something to remove those precedents as a barrier to the states acting, and the only precedent that ends up mattering is the one that is set by the states in a world of the counterplan. The Neck-Gardner evidence isn't super helpful in its own right, but it does say that consensus among state courts can resist precedents that are set by federal ones and, quote, influence official opinion on the propriety of that federal ruling. I think the 2NR should have spent more time explaining this, but I also would need to do work for the Act to contextualize their deficits to this counterplan, and the cards read a lot better for the negative. So I do not think that there is really a risk of a certainty deficit. I think the neg just has to win a sliver of a link that courts can be drawn into congressional fights. The 2NR just barely ekes this out. I think one is that the app has dropped the explanation that the plan would be the most controversial thing ever because of the IPR specific link, and I didn't catch the answer to that in the 2AR. Second is that even if the courts can take the blame in sub-instances, which all of your evidence is very good at establishing, the courts have newly become politicized, not newly, I mean in the past 20 years I guess, since Bush v. Gore, and the public is more likely to pin it on the president, which costs PC. The Heath evidence is way better than all of the jokes are giving it credit for. It says, quote, it is highly unlikely that court action will not, at least to some extent, be blamed on the president and Congress. I think the app should have made arguments like conceding on T courts that the plan is announced in June and just said that this process takes forever, but that didn't happen, so there's a risk that spillover of people being angry at the courts and then by proxy Congress and the executive occurs within the time frame that the bill is being debated. The last piece of defense, the issue with the ABM stuff is the reason the case sells to dissent and unsustainability. The 2AR never answers the very intuitive negative objection that just because we are able to make predictions about things does not mean we'll actually use those predictions to respond to them. This is also decent defense to the case about your stuff. It's explained 3 separate times, which was kind of redundant in the 2NR, but they said even if we make predictions, there's quote no coherent explanation for how it's deployed to decision-making levels, so the next internal links or attempt to try has to come first. And again, at the bottom of the flow, they said literally no one would listen. I think this is approaching sort of, not presumption, but it highly mitigates your inroads to solving the dissent, as well as some of the case, which is obviously the impact to the deficit. I think, lastly, the 2NR should have been capped. I don't know, maybe I'm alone in this. I thought that the app was in a pretty bad position because the only framework offense they extended was straight turned by your framework offense that they didn't answer. There was a haphazard attempt to extend cap good, but they didn't answer a lot of the unsustainability warrants turn case, cap turns every impact stuff. The permutation wasn't explained super in depth, and the mindset fiat argument is answered by non-resolutional theories, arbitrary and bad, which the 1AR didn't answer from conditionality. You can cross by condo answers, cross obligations of fairness, defense on framework, etc.
Yeah, I think Serena's decision was remarkably thorough. I don't have a ton of substance to add. I think the main thing for me on the counterclaim was just that the AF did not have much at all to say about the idea that after, so first of all, there's no AF argument that says the states won't implement the plan. It is true for the purpose of my decision that after the devolution, all 50 states implement the plan. Then this question of does it spill back up and get reflected in Supreme Court precedent? So I think that the reason that Johnny nuked this argument, I didn't get that vibe from the debating. I think it's a question that's left unanswered by the speeches, whether the fact that the counterplan abolishes the authority to do the plan, what the ultimate implication of that for whether the Supreme Court can rule on it is. I thought the AF arguments on this were way more just it wouldn't happen, not that it legally is precluded from happening, or at least that's how I.
Yeah, I just flowed 2AR words, no spill up, counterplan bans it, and then
okay.
I thought counterplan text did ban it.
That is not how I understood the AF arguments. I think that's where we differ. And so the way I understood the AF arguments was much more neg ev says should not would, it's speculative, etc. And I thought the neg cards on this part were very good. They are old, but that is not this is kind of a legal theory question. And if the states uniformly implement the plan as a result of the devolution, then I thought for the purpose of this debate, the ultimate result would be that federal law would either, if it is true that the authority to do the plan is banned, then federal law would at least recognize the states as the authority on this issue. And so anyone who in the industry is looking for a federal law signal, the signal that they receive would be the states are the last word on this and they have all done it. So I thought that solved essentially 100% of the certainty deficit. There's not an argument from the AF that's a time frame differential about innovation in the interim that's it needs to be fast. It's just kind of all at this level of abstraction that certainty is what I should care about. And I think even if that is completely true, the counterplan has solved that to a sufficient degree that I thought that the neg only needed very little dissent, which, you know, granted, like, yeah, you're right. The neg is going for the politics DA against the court AF, but that kind of just like spot is not sufficient to zero it, given the position I think the counterclaim's in. You know, I did not, like, I kind of entered the decision like thinking I was going to vote AF, and then I thought about all that stuff and read the card doc, and it just like, the neg kind of inched it over the finish line with things like, you know, only we have Ev about IPR that says that it's like, you know, that I should treat it as kind of the most kind of controversial issue possible. The thumper that says that the courts make decisions against Trump is like, you know, the only thing that the link has ever been connected to in the debate is IPR. So like, I don't think that thumps the link just because, you know, courts cause political reactions. The only thing that is attached to the capacity to affect the internal link in the debate is IPR. You all are not contesting that. Like a June argument from the AF would, you know, nuke this dissent, and that's not present. And just like there's a lot of sort of like auxiliary things that usually go along with court AF doesn't link to politics that just like were not present in these AF speeches, and those are usually the things that are kind of difference makers. And so I think like I evaluated politics like essentially exactly the same way that Serena did, so I won't reinvent the wheel there. The kind of like, you know, predictions solve all the neg impact things. One, I think like if the counterplan solves, it solves that too, so there's like only a risk of DA. And two, I thought basically the exact same way as Serena about the thing that's like, you don't have an argument that it will be like perfectly or instantly or anything approaching that reflected in governmental decision making, so there's still like, you know, a risk that the tax cuts DA affects the way that the government acts in a way that creates an impact that I think is bigger than certainty deficit.